Okay, we're on air and we're going to get going. So, I'm Melissa with Petal Love, and I'm here with my colleague Jim Brown, our contributing editor down there, and John, of course. John Denuzio is with us. You're from San Luis Obispo, right?
That's right.
Brenda,
Morning.
you are from the Los Angeles County Bicycle Coalition, and do I have it right that you actually live in Downey?
I live in Rampart Village, which is near.
Okay. Fantastic. And Nani, you are with us from San Jose, is that correct?
Correct, San Jose.
Okay, great. Fantastic. Okay, so everybody knows to have their mic on, but mute it when you're not speaking. And we'll probably all forget, and we'll probably all remind each other. Everybody's camera's on, so we're good. So we're going to talk today about using the group's collective wisdom to refine your strategy in using storytelling on a current or planned project, or maybe one you're just making up right now if you don't have anything that you're working on. And we're going to talk about further strengthening your storytelling skills. We're going to talk about the process of identifying other stories with other people that would be good for the specific needs of the advocacy work that you're doing, and why it's important to share more stories and identifying those stories. So we're going to dig into all of that today. And Jim is going to share with us again, going over the group agreements. And Jim, you need to put there you are.
Yeah, I'll always remember to do it. So, yeah, I just want to kind of run over what we talked about last week about creating a comfortable place for us all to share. Bring all of yourself to the discussion. Your perspective and participation are super, super important, even if you're not convinced that they are. So please show up. Stretch yourself. Pay attention to how you show up. If you're somebody like me who likes to talk a lot, hold back a little bit and see what it's like just to listen a little bit more. Kind of fight that habit energy. And if you're somebody who tends to be a little quieter, see what it's like to step up a little bit and share a little bit more. This is just about exploring limits a little bit. We want to create a space for each other, which really means when somebody is speaking, they have the floor, and we listen and watch them wholeheartedly, really give them our full attention. Excuse me. Our discussion today is going to try to focus on what's genuinely helpful, and to think about what how we can help bring out the best in each other by listening to what someone says they need, and also thinking in terms of constructive, helpful feedback. And finally, we want to respect the confidentiality of what's shared here, not because it's controversial but because it's personal. You might not want somebody else telling your story right now, or talking about your story outside of this circle. So to create a sense of safety, I'd like to suggest that we agree to keep the conversation here. Is there anything else that anybody else needs today in order for this to feel like a productive session? We're all good? Awesome. So Melissa's going to recap some of the points that we covered in last week's session, as well as talk about a few more ideas to help make these stories even more compelling.
Yes, exactly. So the great late poet and dancer and author extraordinaire Maya Angelou said, "People won't remember what you say, but they will remember how you made them feel." And this is basically storytelling, the magic of storytelling in a nutshell. And that's why it's really so important. So when you think about the hero's journey, remember again that whether it's your own story or looking to other people's stories, you're not looking for the story of winning and success. You're looking for the story of learning, overcoming, struggle and overcoming, and transformation. That's what really makes a compelling hero's journey story. And what comes next with that? Because what people are going to learn from you. from this. And that's really, they're going to start seeing themselves in your story. And that's what you really want, the personal becoming universal. Zoom in on things. So if you have like a 2 or 3 year campaign that you've been working on, and you're like, how the heck am I going to tell the hero's journey of this big long story in a 2-minute council or 2-minute any other place? Zoom in on something. Like, what can you focus in on, one segment of it that you can make that hero's journey story instead of trying to bite off the whole thing. And then you can really get into an aha moment from that. Like, what made you see the world anew because of that segment of that journey? For me personally, remember, it was that I had taken the bus and kind of the bus of shame to go pick up my car, or not pick up my car, say goodbye to my car in the impoundment yard. And I realized, wow, I can travel in air-conditioned comfort and read, which is one of my very favorite things to do while being on the bus. And it was something that I hadn't even considered for years and years. Choose 1 or 2 sense memories. And this is from a very well-known writing coach and Hollywood story guru. When they want to fix a script, they go to a woman named Babette Bruster, who wrote a book called Do Story, and we will share that with you after this. She talks about zooming in on 1 or 2 sense memories. So remember when I told you my story, I talked about how hot it was, and I talked about how I was pulling along my suitcase behind me and it was rattling and clacking even more than normal because it was empty, because I wasn't going on a vacation. So this is when you really start to become a storyteller, is when you start involving people by invoking that memory, that sense memory, and that they can totally relate to. Then you want to use active words, not big words. You want to use active words, and you don't want to use jargon. So acronyms and synonyms and things like that. I can rattle off LACBC, but John and Nani won't know what I'm talking about. And so when I'm talking about the Los Angeles County Bicycle Coalition, I need to assume that nobody else in the room knows what I'm talking about. Same as the California Bicycle Coalition, whatever you're talking about. Just put yourself in the shoes of somebody who's never been in the audience before and making them feel welcome. No insider baseball jargon. And then, like I said, really look to include an aha learning moment that you had from this experience. Something that really flipped the script for you, something that made you see the world anew. And now we're going to go back to Jim's takeaway. Go to Jim, and he's going to talk about his takeaways.
A couple things I want to amplify with Melissa, and one is that it's really important to practice your story by writing it down. We've talked about speaking from the heart and speaking authentically. At the same time, you want to know you're going to be able to land this story, and writing it down and reading it out loud are ways that it starts to settle into your brain. When I have to give a presentation or a talk, I would even do this in front of the city council. If I was going to testify in front of the city council, I had exactly 2 minutes to say what I wanted to say. I wrote it all down, and I'd sit in my office and close the door and recite it, a couple dozen times, so that I was sure that I had the right words that I wanted to give them, and that I could deliver it fluently and without hesitation. So when I got to the podium, I wasn't having to remember something. I had it written down. I was able to deliver it in a way that was sort of fluid and convincing. This is how you're also going to start to see what feels right and true to you. You become your own editor and become your own proofreader. If you're somebody who's concerned about how your story might be received, if you're thinking about how your audience, what conclusions your audience might take from your story, and if that feels like a concern, remember that your story exists within the context of your advocacy goals. it's going to be rare that your story has to carry 100% of what you're trying to accomplish, right? If you are at a city council meeting, you will have submitted written testimony more than likely, or you hand them a written statement to include in the record, or if you are appearing. If you're telling your story in a newsletter or on a website, that's the context that you're telling your story in. So don't sweat that you have to make every single data point, and that the success or failure of your advocacy effort lives or dies based on how well you tell that story. You obviously want to aim to do the best you possibly can, but remember that these stories live within the context of your goal, your strategy. And then finally, think about telling your story the way you need to tell it. In other words, think about who is listening and why you're telling them the story. Last week, Nani, you were talking about delivering your story in front of, I think, the court related to sentencing or parole. There are going to be some specific things you'll want to communicate, and you know all of this. You'll be communicating in that setting, and it might be, and that's important for that setting, but you might want to add something or change something about it if you're talking to a group of people who are like you, who have had experienced a tragic loss because of a traffic collision. So just remember that you have the freedom to tailor your story to the circumstances you're telling it in. There isn't just one version of that story. It can be, you can tell it longer, you can tell it shorter. So, you know, the reason that we focused last week on a 2-minute story is partly to make sure that we had plenty of time to discuss it. But 2 minutes is the typical limit for speaking before a city council, for example. And once you kind of get that duration of story in your head, now you can kind of play with it and say, okay, well, I know what it sounds like when I'm doing it for 2 minutes, but this next stop, you know, I'm going to get up in front of a group and talk for 10 minutes. There's a different story that you'll tell. So just keep that in mind. And that really leads us to the exercise we're doing today, which is all about how stories fit into the context of an advocacy strategy. We're going to spend probably the next, close to the next hour talking about the process of identifying the right story for the job. So by right story, I mean either the story that you need to tell, or if you're in this position, finding somebody else's story to tell. There's a logic to how we go about finding the right story based on what you're trying to accomplish and whose hearts and minds you really need to change in order to accomplish that goal. So like I was saying, Nani, what you say to the court may be different than what you say to your peers. And it has to do with what you're trying to accomplish by telling your story. The homework assignment we gave you is basically the approach you would follow in developing a strategic plan. So this is really like the strategic plan for identifying the stories that you want to tell for a particular project or campaign or goal. And it's an approach that I use all the time for almost any task. What am I trying to accomplish? Who needs to do what? How do we do it? And that way you're not beginning by thinking about what story do I tell, but rather thinking about what am I trying to accomplish, and then figuring out what story is going to best serve your goal here. So there's kind of 4 parts to the homework. I'm just going to summarize them really quickly. First one is define your goal. Define your advocacy goal. What is the concrete, actionable, measurable thing you're trying to accomplish? And each of you might have a different goal there, but you want to be able to answer that question, and you want to be as specific as possible, because when your goal is specific, that's going to determine all of your choices that follow. So really get into the habit of thinking as specifically as possible about what you're trying to accomplish. Second part of this has to do with identifying your audience. And in this case, your audience is the person or the group whose action is essential for accomplishing your goal. So let's say you're trying to get a crosswalk in at an elementary school. Your audience might be the principal of the school. Your audience might also be the public works director or the city council. So you need to think about who is the person that holds the key, and that's the person whose hearts and minds you need to change. So if you have that person very clearly in mind, you're going to start to be able to make some very concrete decisions that will help you change that person's mind. And then you want to think about choosing your story. And this really depends on what you know about the people who will benefit from your proposed solution, who your audience is, and who your audience listens to. Because knowing those three things is going to start to point you to the right stories for your particular goal. And this applies for almost any goal where a story is valuable. If you're trying to raise money, you want to think about who your potential donors listen to. If you're trying to persuade coworkers, you want to think about where they're coming from, what they understand, who they listen to, and why. If you're trying to convince the court, or you're trying to convince a city council, you want to know more about your audience, and that's going to lead you to the right stories. Your own story might be a perfect fit for this purpose, or you might realize that someone else's story is a better fit. But you want to start by understanding who's going to benefit from what you're trying to do, who your key audience listens to, and why they listen to that audience, why they listen to those people. In other words, think about who you're trying to reach and why you're trying to reach them. And then that kind of leads us finally to methods. Again, how you tell a story within 2 minutes for the city council meeting is very different than how you tell the same story in a face-to-face meeting or in a fundraising letter, right? Your story can expand and contract depending on how you're delivering it. And so that's helpful to kind of know. And typically there are multiple ways to tell the same story. The story that you absolutely need to tell at a city council meeting can also be told on Twitter. It can be told to a news reporter. It can be told in an e-newsletter. So you have a lot of options to play with here. So the important thing to emphasize today is your story might not necessarily be told in front of an audience at a microphone, right? You might not be standing up at a podium. And I say this to reassure you, if you don't feel like you're ready to deliver your TED Talk, and you're worried that somehow that's going to compromise what you're trying to accomplish, remember that you have many ways to tell the story. And this is also true if a story feels too hard to tell. I've talked to other people who have tragic stories about traffic crashes, and it's too hard for them to tell the story. But it might not be too hard to write down that story. And it might not be too hard for somebody else to tell that story. So just keep in mind that there are lots of different ways to tell stories. So with that little brief introduction, not so brief introduction, how did the homework work for you guys? Thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs in the middle? Was it hard? Was it okay? Nani, where are you? What do you think? Terrible? Your mic is off.
Yeah, AC, okay, got it.
No, so this is interesting. You're all kind of in the same place about thinking through this strategic process. So what we're going to do is we're going to spend about 10 minutes or more per person, kind of going over how you answered the questions that we gave you. And, the goal here is to help you clarify what you're trying to accomplish. And again, as I said, what you might be trying to accomplish is you need to persuade the courts to do a particular thing with respect to sentencing or probation, or you might be trying to recruit other people to work with you, or you might be trying to change minds within your office. So the goal here is to clarify what you're trying to accomplish, which is how you'll start to think about what stories will help you do that. And just as a reminder, we talk about a current project or campaign. You might not have one, but you might have an idea of something you'd like to accomplish. Like maybe I want to reach out to more people like me, or I want to get my manager to think more openly about a safe streets campaign of some type. So we're not necessarily asking each of you to come up with the project that you will deliver, but the point of this is really to have to walk through the process of deciding which stories are going to be the most helpful. So I think with that, what I'd like to do is open this up to whoever would like to go first here. Is there any of you, and I'm going to ask you some prompting questions to kind of walk through this. John, we got your homework ahead of time, so perhaps you can share with us what you've come up with. And what I'd like to do is have you start by talking about the first 3 questions around defining your goal. How did you answer those questions?
And turn on your mic.
So the how did I answer those questions was I came into my garage and
Awesome.
just whiteboarded out a couple of sheets
Nice.
here.
I love a whiteboard. I love a whiteboard.
There's lots of this for the.
I have to admit it was a little uncomfortable, right? So last week we gave a story, or I gave a story about a roundabout in a way that was, from where I sit, kind of easy to talk about because it just represents one specific project. And so I did the whole diverse problem exploration kind of thing where I just got everything whiteboarded out. And then part of the reason that I submitted it was really just to go through that motion of having accountability. And 5 minutes before 11, but it gave me the chance to say, look, if I only have 2 minutes, or if I get a 10-minute slot here, I want to have this at least consolidated a bit more.
And remember here, John, we're not talking about the story of your campaign necessarily, but this is the thought process or the logic process that leads you to figuring out what are the stories that will support what it is you're trying to accomplish. So we're not necessarily going to unpack the whole advocacy strategy or the whole campaign, but we want to focus on what do we know about the audience and what does that knowledge tell us about the kinds of stories that will help them listen to what we have to say.
Yeah, so your comments this morning were helpful to reorient what it is I'm trying to do, and I almost had kind of a visceral reaction when you mentioned who holds the keys. Is it the coworkers? Are you trying to change the minds in your office? And those were, so, that we deal with the Board of Supervisors, and I work with, the city managers, or more the planning directors and the public works departments than the city managers, but also the nonprofits, the advocacy groups, the non-governmental organizations, and then committees. So I'm really only have my hands in maybe 3 to 5 committees. Um, but what I'm trying to do centers around the active transportation partnerships.
Okay.
So how everybody's working together, and I did a plan 2.5 years ago about partnerships, and I've been running the plan. I'm now evaluating the plan or the program, but then what we don't have then is the update or the vision for a new regional transportation plan. So we have kind of a product within a product, and then what I don't have are, I suppose, the shared partnership activities. Like, I feel alone. I feel alone, and of course I'm not, right? And of course my job could be, if I chose it to be, would be to pull people together. We've had leadership gaps in our advocacy executive directors. They've transitioned a couple times, and some have gone on to do really interesting things, like on city councils and stuff. But
I know exactly who you're talking about.
I know who you're talking about. Yeah.
yeah. Oh, okay. So yeah, and but from a partnership point of view, and actually it was working with this one individual who really helped us to visualize, like, the mission statement of each committee and the mission statement of each advocacy group, and how do they overlap.
Well, so let's see if we can drill down to your particular goal. Can you say what's the one sentence about the goal that you're trying to accomplish? Like the immediate goal for purposes of this exercise. Are you trying to get a plan finalized? Are you trying to get a plan adopted?
It's even at this moment, I'm still trying to get a plan scoped out, and scope of works, and get all these partners to just sort of agree the framework, but then also to get that internally. So we have within our own office staff that has staff politics, and it's the worst part of the job. And I know that it advocacy groups have advocacy politics, like there's
Yep.
group dynamics and everything. And so I thought having some clear stories in my back pocket would help that. So
That.
if I maybe I could jump to the stories column, or do you want me to do audience, or am I still column
let's
one?
walk through the process, because we're going to see if this process helps lead you to the stories that you need. So it sounds like your goal is to get everybody kind of on board about an update for the plan, and you're sort of struggling with herding cats. You've got community groups, and you've got internal committees, and you've got sort of official agencies. And can you say who would benefit most from the proposed change? Like, who would benefit most from this plan? Who's like the end beneficiary of this plan?
Well, communities would be ultimately, whether they're downtown communities or rural communities.
Okay.
Ideally, this sort of policy and planning work would lead to the right kind of implementation and the right kind of. So again, I'm kind of on the infrastructure side.
And actually, I just want to jump in there really quick, because we have this very interesting dynamic here that I just want to remind both Brenda and Nani that what John is working at is on the regional level, right, in San Luis Obispo. And this is the hard work of planning sidewalk width, street width, roundabouts, bike lanes, bus lanes, all the stuff that he's talking about. And so you're getting a bird's eye view into somebody who truly cares about this kind of stuff. And what you want to be looking for, you want to be looking for your John when
Yeah.
you go forward, right, in the world, right? Because then there are Johns in the planning regional stuff. And the Los Angeles County Bicycle Coalition is interesting because it's a regional organization of one of the largest, right? Like it's the size of a country.
Yeah.
And diverse population. So Los Angeles is actually, as far as the area, is even bigger than what John is dealing with. So Nani, this gives you a real bird's eye view of that. Sometimes you can think, wow, people are against us, they're not doing anything for us. And then you can see that, well, the system is often not working very well. And you're hearing John talk about the politics, but that doesn't mean that there aren't people that care really passionately that can become your allies.
And
So, sorry, I want to jump. I was like, I want to make sure we don't miss this.
no, it's very helpful. I mean, we used to joke that people like John were the embedded advocates, like they were our kind of our secret allies inside the organizations. And what Brenda and Nani, what you're trying to do on the community side is influencing what John is trying to do from the inside. John needs relationships with your counterparts in his community, and your counterparts in his community need that relationship with John. So it's a thank you for pointing that out, Melissa, because this is really an interesting constellation of people here. John, I want to jump back in and say, so if you had to pick one key person whose action is essential to achieving your goal, who would that be? Is it a committee? Is it a person? Is it a coworker? You can pick one of them. Let's see if you can pick the most important one, but let's try to pick one.
You know what is gonna make you guys laugh is I think it's me. I think I am in my own way with a lot of this stuff, and I really do have. We are fortunate that at the regional level, we have a board that is broad enough and diverse enough to allow for room on the active transportation front, even with everything that else is going on with the buses and other stuff. And so I know that our area is lucky that way, because not you go to other jurisdictions and major areas, and then you have a majority that just have closed it off, and so people, so staff and volunteers and advocates, people who are passionately working for non-governmental organizations, just hit these walls that they just, not enough sandbags could lift it up. It just they hit these walls. So we don't have any of those walls. Would be in my own imagination, and even with the more let's say less active transportation isn't as much of a priority for them, there are still inroads with safe routes to school. And so 3 of my stories are safe, building up the story of safe routes to school, infrastructure and campaigns, recognizing the efforts of peace officers, police that use bicycles as part of their work.
Well, so John, let's focus on, for the purpose of this discussion, let's say that the key person you want to whose action you need, like let's say the action is you need them to agree to support what you're doing, to kind of sign off on what you're doing. And let's just say that's the police. Let's say it's law enforcement.
Could I jump in again and just share another truth? Because the reality is it isn't. The reality is that there's I have a division chief, who's one of my best friends, but there's also, like, I feel like I'm JV and there's a varsity team.
So let's pick
And I'm just not. Varsity teams make it the cool kids, the popular kids, whatever.
Why? I got to jump in. This is brilliant storytelling. But why?
And the question I want to ask as you're thinking about that is, I really want you to focus on one person or one group whose action you need, because that's going to lead you to the stories. If you think about all the millions of cats you have to herd, there are millions of stories you're going to have to marshal to address each of those groups. But to help you understand the process, and I think you're onto it, let's pick your division chief. What do you need your division chief to do? I'm going to ask you very pointed questions. What do you want him to do?
I wanted him to sign off on a project charter.
Okay.
I wanted him to just sign off and say, you have got these responsibilities. You get on your ship and you sail it around, the Tierra del Fuego and make the delivery.
And so if who does your division chief listen to? If who needs to tell him that John needs your support, John needs you to sign off on this? Who does your division chief listen to?
So he is much more in tune with the long-term politics of our board.
Okay.
And he just, like with a little abacus, he just understands how asking for too much active transportation stuff in the wrong way, that it could just backfire everything.
So I'm asking you, what do you know about him in terms of who he listens to? Are there people he listens to?
Yeah. So I mean, he'll listen to the executive director, who is now new. So, but I know him. But there was and that's a big deal to have an executive director come and go, at least for our point of view, because of the longevity.
Which okay, so everybody is on the same page. The executive director of which organization?
Okay, so for the regional council of governments, so this would be like LA Metro or SCAG.
So I'm going to jump in and say, it sounds like your division chief listens to the executive director, and because he's always calculating the politics, the groups he can't afford to ignore are some of the key board members on the board, right? Because he's got to keep track of them, and he can't afford to ignore the person whose opinion is really strong. So now we can jump into, we sort of know who he listens to and who he can't afford to ignore. What are the stories, whose stories best illustrate the problem? And I'm going to give you a hint. Look at how you answered the question 1C. Look at how you answered the question of what groups or communities would most benefit most from this solution. Because that's going to tell you whose stories best illustrate the problem. So let's say there are commuters out in the distant part of the county who can't get into their workplace conveniently because traffic is tangled up, and that's what your plan is going to fix. Those are stories that are going to be very helpful as you start to make your case with your division chief, especially if they're stories from commuters who are represented by key board members, right? So your board members are elected officials from throughout the region, because that's how a council of government works. And so if you've got a key council member from Santa Maria, right? You have people from Santa Maria. If you had constituents of that person from Santa Maria talking to that person, now you've got a board member who's hearing from the end beneficiaries of your plan, and the support of that person is now going to be crucial to shaping the opinion and the stance of your division chief. So
I want to jump in here one thing, because I don't want to forget to have you talk about it a little bit, Jim, because I think it applies here. The language active transportation, right? It's like, oh, we've gotten too many active transportation things. We're pushing that too much. But sometimes people don't realize that the things that you're talking about putting into place is really for everybody. And so Jim was telling me yesterday a story about a bike lane on J Street in Sacramento for the shopping district that wasn't really about bike advocates. It was about slowing down traffic so that the businesses could thrive. So
I think what Melissa's pointing to is the value of understanding the variety and diversity of people who will benefit from the plan. You know, what I'd like to say about bike stuff is I would often say, hey, if you give me a lane on this street, I'm going to be out of your way and you're going to be able to get where you need to go better. So all boats rise if we can right size our streets. Streets have to serve everybody, but they can't serve one group at the exclusion of the other. And so we're looking for that right balance. So you know, we've talked about the fact that your plan reaches parts of the community, and we're going to need to wrap this up in a minute, but and move on to the next one. But you're talking about reaching out to parts of the community that will benefit from the plan. You've talked about the politics on the board being a factor in how supportive your division chief is or isn't, right? If most of your board is opposed to what you're talking about, it's a non-starter for your division chief. So the stories that matter here are going to be stories that touch those board members. And again, I don't know your situation, so I'm hypothesizing here, I'm speculating, but my guess would be that stories that would be valuable for you to look for would be you're now going to want to think about those individual board members as audiences for stories, right? And so I happen to know that the county supervisor in the northeast part of the county is very, very anti-tax and very pro-business, right? So when I talked to Supervisor Frost, I didn't bother talking about, you know, clean air and safe children because that's not her thing, right? So I had to find the thing that would allow us to have a conversation. If I just went in there and said, this has to be about bicycles, she said, yeah, I don't care, right? And so the conversation stopped. So your goal is to keep that conversation going. So I think another thing to think about here is sort of where and when will those stories be needed? Because you've talked about a division chief that listens to the executive director. You've also talked about a division chief that's calculating the politics on the board. So you want to be thinking about decision points that the board's going to be making where stories might be valuable. So that could be one thing. You also in getting the division chief to say yes to something, you might do this whiteboard exercise and figure out who is it on the board that the division chief listens to most, and for each of those people, who do they listen to, right? So you're creating this kind of network or web that reaches out into the communities. And then you can say at the end of this is like, where this really matters is commuters from Santa Maria and business owners in Morro Bay and kids trying to get to school in this neighborhood in San Luis Obispo, right? So you're onto something here by your tendency to want to do whiteboarding and that kind of thing. I think that I do that all the time. I drove my staff crazy with whiteboarding because I loved it, and that's just how my brain thinks. So use that as your tool for guiding you out to those really persuasive stories. And then think also about the ways that you could possibly tell those stories. So it might be stories you are prepared to discuss in a face-to-face meeting, right? Like that may be where the stories are most persuasive. You might want to put together a fact sheet that captures some of those stories. Or even better, you might want to reach out to the business owners in Morro Bay that you know and get a few of them to send a letter to your division chief, right? A letter is a story. Like, I care about this plan because it's going to help my customers get to work, right? That's a story, and it can be delivered to your division chief or the executive director of the board in the form of a letter.
And I'm going to jump in here real quick again. Look for the gazelles, and that's from my partner, Charlie. who John, you know who he is.
Yeah.
Look for the gazelles, right? So the gazelles are the people in the different business districts that really are the innovators. And so we had that in Long Beach with the, Charlie brought the parklet idea from San Francisco to Long Beach and handed it over to a woman who was the head of a local business district. And she and another, her name's Kasten Kansteiner, and she owned two businesses. And she took it and ran with it. And she knew how to get things through the city council. And so we had a historic district where it was basically known for years, and I'm talking about 30 years, as like one of the antique gold mines of the United States. Like, this is where you got all the vintage clothes. But she came along and opened a coffee house and then a second restaurant, and then became friends with somebody else, and they opened restaurants. And all of a sudden you have a boutique vintage clothing with all these fabulous restaurants, and they took on the parklets, and they did them more beautifully than almost anything, and faster than almost anybody. Because we had an urban planner on the city council that said, oh, this is fantastic. So you've got all these different areas that are unique and interesting. And those council districts where they're really business focused, right? They've got their gazelles who get that slower traffic means people will sit outside and dine and come here and shop. So it just,
I get it, and thank you so much. Just like 30 seconds, and we can move forward. I appreciate that. It's like raining parklets now, though, right?
It is.
So
Yeah.
it's just, downtown SLO has more parklets installed in the last month than has ever before. Like, the permits can't come out fast enough, so it's right, an interesting time for parklets. But
I wanted to just jump in and say, let's focus on the storytelling piece, because that's what this workshop is about. And what we really want to talk about is like, who would be the champions for the solutions? Like, who would be the champions for the parklets if that's the solution? So we want to think about the gazelles in terms of their story. For our purposes, we're focused specifically on the story.
Let me ask you, I have one question.
And then we'll need to wrap up.
One question relating to that specifically, because as you were talking, I was reminded of a story and a situation that occurred, and I'm like, why didn't I think of that story? It's something that already has happened, like a delivery for a Safe Routes to School project in a small rural community. Public Works just didn't want to put it in. We had the money, the principal, the supervisor, all these meetings happened, and they just didn't want to do it. And I had to sit and accept that and trust the process, right? Because I want to raise, and I just had to roll with it. But if I'm really going to tell a story about partnership, I want to tell that story, even though it's going to pull open the wound a bit. So is it better to tell, should I let that one go because it's more it won't rock the boat, or do I just and think of some other situation that maybe is more new? It's not resolved. So this one's resolved. There's not anything I'll be able to do to change it other than maybe learn to work better. But nobody really wants to go that way. So I just wanted your advice on that.
I would say you want to focus on, well, this is forward looking. What is going to get the yes that you need? And
I because we're taking a lot of time on this, what I'd say is that, Jim, why don't we have a call with John at another time and talk about that?
We're available offline to do some consulting with you on this, because I want to make sure we're leaving enough time for Brenda and Nani to share their strategies. Yep. I really appreciate your thought process is spot on, right? Because sometimes this is nebulous. You don't know what stories you need in order to accomplish your goal, and sometimes you have to really talk it out. So you're asking the right questions and you're looking in the right places. Melissa and I'd be happy to talk to you offline to give you a little more concrete advice or thoughts on how you might move forward. And with that, I think I'd like to switch over to hearing from either Brenda or Nani about a project or goal or campaign that you guys are working on. Which of you wants to go? Who's feeling ready? The first person to turn on their mic gets to be the one that goes.
How about if we say Brenda?
Brenda, do you want to go ahead and we'll walk through those questions?
Sure.
Tell us about the goal that you're, the specific thing that you want to accomplish. Tell us about your project and what you want to accomplish.
So I chose a more hypothetical project. This is based on a ride that I did on Thursday for work. And it was a ride that we published on Friday for our members, just to kind of get them going on their own with instructions and all that stuff. And so I started the ride. I was like, it would be cool to have the starting point be this public transit location in order to like merge that and increase access. And then from the transit location, I'd have people ride to a recreation area, and then they can do like 10 miles on a protected bike lane. But when I started my ride at the transit station, the 2.7 miles from the transit station to the recreation area were not beginner friendly. So it's this like beginner friendly infrastructure with this like wide, heavily trafficked infrastructure that is really suitable more for confident cyclists that are just ready to take the lane or share the lane, not for beginners. And this is a family friendly ride is what we're calling them. So I chose my goal as just creating a bicycle friendly connection between this transit station and the recreation area. So I just kind of thought that the action that would be needed would be to create a bike lane along the two major streets that are the quickest connections to the recreation area. For the groups that would benefit the most, I would imagine that if it's just that short stretch that I'm imagining, it would really only be lower income families that want to recreate there, and not just people who live in that area or close to the station, but this transit train has stations all over the east side of LA County, like Pasadena and then East LA. So families from all over that line could really benefit from just this one piece of infrastructure. And then just people, without cars that want to visit this place and that want to connect to this bicycle infrastructure in a safe way. It wouldn't really benefit commuters if it's just that stretch, right?
Okay. Tell us about the audience. Who's the key person or group that you would need to influence in order to get this implemented? Do you need a plan adopted first? Do you need money? What's sort of the order of things that you need?
Yeah, I don't do this type of work too much for my org. I do like other stuff. So I just put like a few different audiences as potential people here. I put like the local like city or neighborhood council, businesses along that stretch, people who actually ride the train and get on and off at that location, and then motor vehicle commuters along that stretch. Because I was taking the lane, as you're supposed to do, and like got honked at as you often do. So just that people feeling inconvenienced. So those people really need to buy in as well. So really kind of creating a campaign that communicates the importance of this connection to mainly, I think it's like city council and then like local stakeholders,
So the decider here would be what? Do you think, is it a council district or would it be the whole city council? Or is it a county decision?
I'm not sure, but let's say it's county.
So, so you want them to approve your plan, let's say. That's kind of your starting place. You need to have the plan approved so that you can then talk about how it's going to be implemented. Where do you find the money? When does it get built?
I think first it just needs to be like, oh, let's draw attention to this even being a problem so that members in the community can come together to draft that plan.
So it sounds like your audience really is community members, because you want them to decide to participate in this vision.
And is this a separated bike lane? Is that what you're talking about? Not just a painted bike lane, right?
I mean, a separated bike lane would be ideal. A painted bike lane would be the least, and
Okay.
I would take it. You know.
Okay.
So you have this idea, you want to close this gap, this 2.5 mile gap, between the transit station and the first and the nearest piece of beginner infrastructure, and you want to get the community behind you to support this concept and really begin gathering energy to push for it. What do you want that audience specifically to do? Do you want them to show up to a meeting? Do you want them to sign a petition? Do you want them to contact their city council member? What do you need them to do? Like, what does their buy-in look like? Is there an action tied to that buy-in?
Let's say for now it's sign a petition.
Okay, so you want a community, you want members of the community to sign a petition, and so now let's talk about what stories would be useful in getting them to do that. So whose stories best illustrate the need for this change? And like I said, go back to how you answered the define the goal questions, because you've talked about who would benefit most from this solution or change. This is sort of a hint. That's whose stories are going to be really helpful, right? So you've talked about low-income families living in the neighborhood, and then potentially people who want to recreate along this trail and need to get from and want to access it by transit. So you kind of have two audiences here. You've got the low-income families and then transit users who want to use transit as part of a recreational trip.
And I have a question, if there's a possible third. Are there small businesses along anywhere here that might benefit from more people deciding that this was someplace they wanted to go, that they could buy lunch or something like that?
Yeah, there definitely are. It's very industry and like office perky too, but then there are also those like smaller businesses along the way that maybe they don't get as much traffic like on the weekends.
That's right.
You know?
Well, and this is what we've seen with Ciclavia in Los Angeles, right? Like businesses in neighborhoods that normally don't have a lot of action on a Saturday or Sunday suddenly see it go through the roof because all these people come to the neighborhood. So those businesses are going to be very valuable. Now let's narrow down to you want to inspire the community to support this idea. So think about what particular stories are likeliest to touch that audience. Like think about what is the story that's going to get your audience to say, "Yep, I'm 100% on board." Is it a mom who likes to bike with her kids? Is it somebody who doesn't have a park in their neighborhood but loves to ride the recreational trail out to this recreation area because then they get this outdoor experience? So think about the people you want to have join your campaign, and then think about what's going to get them to say, yes, no, this totally makes sense to me, right? Because those are going to be the stories you want to really focus on. And remember, we're talking about a thought process you can apply to any goal. Like this could be about a fundraising campaign at LICBC. It could be a process that you use to get a neighborhood improvement in your neighborhood. You as a resident can kind of get the neighborhood organized to go accomplish something to make the streets safer. So it's a thought process that you're going to be able to use with a lot of different projects or goals. Do you have any questions about how we've sort of gotten here at this point? From what you're saying, it sounds like this is pretty clear to you about how to think about this.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. I think it's just like I can see like listening to John. Right? Like I can see why it's so difficult because there's so many. There's like this is a hypothetical small thing, right? potentially, where you can easily identify like whose minds you need to change. But when it's just such a larger collaborative thing with so many key players, it can get like pretty intense, you know.
And remember that a storytelling strategy for an advocacy campaign, you might have 3 different storytelling strategies, right? Like the first thing you need to do is get the community fired up behind this concept. So there's storytelling strategy to get them to do that. And now you've got the community on fire, and now you need to go to the city to say, we want to talk to you about how you would develop a plan. There might have to be a different storytelling strategy to get the city, the public works department or the mayor or the city council to say, yeah, we're interested in this. Right. So, and
and think about like the community could bring you the stories, right? Like you don't have to do the heavy lifting of going and finding all the stories. You say, we're looking for these kinds of stories. Do you want to tell yours? And it's a great way to actually let the community know that you're actually listening to them, right? And you can tell stories in at least 2 languages, possibly 3, I'm guessing, right? For this area. And in some of these areas, they're not really into social media. So maybe it needs to be a little leaflet. It needs to be a little door hanger or something, like where you're telling this, you're literally telling the story to ask people to come and tell more stories. And that restaurateur says, I want to tell you a story. I'd love to have people coming here on the weekend.
And another possibility would be to set up a table at the transit station on a Saturday, and you can have a big sign saying, are you interested in a better connection to the trail, right? Or this route, right? Like, how do you get from here to whatever intersection we're talking about? That can be the way to get people to tell you their stories, right? Because you're in the gathering stage at this point. You want to gather those stories, and there are lots of ways you can think about doing that. Like Melissa said, going out into the community might be the most effective way to do that. If you've got a community where multiple languages are spoken, no one channel might be the channel that reaches everybody. So you might have to figure out ways to do that. We were trying to reach the Hmong community in Sacramento, and I had a Hmong employee, and I was working with him on this, and he said, yeah, the way you do that is you get all the aunties in the household to know about something, because it's their job in the household to tell everybody else. So so what you do is set up a table at the grocery store to hand the information to the aunties, and they will most assuredly take it home and share it. Another neighborhood, we went to the neighborhood association because the local church sent people to that neighborhood association meeting, and they were the gatherers of information. And then this one guy, Barry, like every Sunday would stand up at church and convey to the congregation what he had been hearing at the neighborhood association. And that was really helpful for me to know, because I needed to know that I needed to keep that channel open with Barry. So it wasn't about what I was posting on Facebook or what I was posting on social media, but was what I was saying to Barry when I saw Barry. So again, you want to think about how stories get shared and how they get collected. And we've already talked about the audiences. You've got some really rich audiences here. And then you want to think about like all of the ways you could possibly tell those stories to reach the community. So, you could put up a table at the transit station. You could hand out flyers. You could have a poster that you put in community centers or at grocery stores. You could organize a ride, right? You could organize a ride where everybody in the neighborhood, or you could do a walk. I don't know if you've done this at LACBC, but we did walking audits and bike audits. We'd literally walk the street, and it'd be like a mobile focus group. And we would take everybody out and say, okay, so how does this intersection look to you? And they'd say, super hairy, traffic's going too fast, nobody's stopping, there isn't a crosswalk. That's the kind of thing that inspires people to participate, right? And so you've got them hooked in now because they've actually seen it and you've asked their opinions. They're now ripe to give you stories that are going to help illustrate the need here. How did
And
this?
I want to jump in really quick. Like, if that particular area has a little paper, right? Like, has a little, some kind of, even if it's really, really community, invite that person on what Jim is talking about. Because when you get the reporters down there, they're like, oh, I haven't been on my bike in 20 years. Oh, yeah, okay, I'll clean it up and come. Wow, this is really, somebody should do something about this.
Yeah,
And you're like, great. You have 500, 5,000, 30,000 people on your email list. Help. You're the right person.
So how has this thought process work for you? Does it help you figure out which stories and whose stories and how to tell them?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. What questions do you have? Is there anything else you want to share or you want to ask about?
I know that this isn't part of this training, and so maybe it's like another training, but thinking about how this fits into a larger advocacy strategy and how to create that. So like I was recently tasked for work to create a communications strategy around our bike match campaign. And I was like, how do I do that? How does that work? So I used the hero story to kind of help ground me in like the interviews that we're going to have with people. But it made me think like, oh, it would be great to know like how all these little parts could fit into this larger vision and how to create that larger vision.
And we're kind of giving you one piece at a time here, because storytelling is part of a communication strategy. There are other parts of that communication strategy that relate to storytelling. We're not going to go into it today, but there's media outreach that has a big role to play in how your stories get out to the wider world, right?
And
it's not about the stories itself, but it's about how you work with the media in order to get those stories out to the audiences you need to reach.
And like I said with John, we are available
Yeah,
to
we're a resource.
about this. And it's my, like John is, like Jim is very familiar with San Jose and San Luis Obispo. You're in my old stomping ground, right? And so you're in the number 2 media market in the country. And if the LACBC would come back out with a really strong communications plan that really hooked in the local media, it would really be wise. And we would love to talk to you about that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'll reach out to you afterwards.
You got it. We look forward to it.
Nani, you've been so quiet.
And patient with us. Thank you.
Patient. Yes.
So I first off, okay. Okay. So I will start off by saying that I took the course through Safe Streets, and what you guys have provided me is the validation that I am an advocate and that I'm doing all of the things correctly and to the best of my ability. I have already gone in front of the San Jose City Council in February to talk for Vision Zero. I've been in the newspaper of the San Jose Mercury because of Bob's death. I didn't expect to. I've gone to the traffic violence walk, spoke there. I've gone to grief sharing for people who've lost. I've talked there. I shared with you my court thing last week because that's my next step in my journey. I've gone to court throughout, and I've gone to first responders memorials. I've gone to MAD organization things. Crime victims. I've gone to crime victim as a crime victim, sat through a Christmas and all of us commiserating. My last year has been working towards what I do. My shirt says it all. Bobby would go. Bobby's my husband, and we're going. So, you validated all the things that I'm doing. And with your presentation, it just means that I'm hitting the right notes, because I'm refreshed that I was the one listed in the San Jose Mercury on February 12th. I remember my 2-minute speech. I sat there from 1 o'clock in the afternoon, hoping that we were on the agenda for 2 o'clock. We did not get to our item to 5 o'clock in the afternoon. That's something others need to be prepared for.
Yep.
I had to sit and listen to the sewer system updates of what they had to do. I had to listen to your regional stuff, Jim, of
Yeah.
all of these people.
Yeah.
I had to sit there, okay? And in the meantime, I was reading the Vision 02 data that the city council, and I'd already gone to 2 city council meetings prior to this where they kept pushing Vision 0 to the next meeting. So so I've gone there. My opening statement when it was my turn to talk, and you're right, you have to target your stories to who you are with, and I do.
Good.
So I got up behind 2 people talking about bike lanes, okay? And you can see the city council's not ready to deal with that. And I got up and I looked at them, and you can read the paper. My first statement to the city council was, my husband was number 42 in 2019. The year, and it ended up being 60. Basically, I just said, the numbers don't mean anything, because that's all you see. I want you to see fathers, mothers, children, people who you see a number 42, but you don't see the outline of all of the other people that life affected. It's kind of like you throw a rock in and that's what you're affecting. And so I'm doing all the right things, and by going to these classes, I'm doing it right. And my next fight is with the courts, and it's not the court's fault. And then my other thing is I am following Vision 0, because at the end of the city council, I got what I wanted. They're funding $7 million into Vision 0. Now I will follow them to make sure they get the $7 million. So in this discovery, I've also found out San Jose was short 55 traffic enforcement officers. Just traffic enforcement. That doesn't include robbery or heinous crimes. We're short. And we have a trend where money doesn't get spent on traffic. As Jim probably knows, it doesn't get paid. You got to do this and everything.
We could talk for hours, Nani.
Yep. So anyway, I just want to say, I feel validated in all that I work on and how I tell my stories to the various groups that I go and talk to, and as an individual.
Nani, I really want to thank you for pointing that out. You are the walking advertisement for the value of storytelling, and you made the point very clearly when you said number 42 doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
But when I'm the face of number 42, when Bobby is the face of number 42, it's a completely different discussion. And so
that's when the city council put their pencils down.
That's right.
Yeah, that's what you're going for.
And I see some parallels between, John, what you're trying to accomplish, and Nani, what you're talking about, right? Because John's stuck in the world that wants to look at data. And I'm not saying that's what you want to look at, John, but your world operates in the realm of data. You're going to be looking at the number 42, and you want to be able to have the Nanis of the world validating that number, right? You want to be validating the numbers. And Nani, you're very, very shrewd in understanding that putting the human face on on the data is important, because I think at the end of the day, both things matter, right?
Yes.
It's important to say that you are number 42, right? Like
Mhm.
you're human face number 42, right? So
Mhm.
the data is really important, because then eyes bug out when you realize there are several dozen other people in exactly the same position as you.
Mhm.
Think about how many people's lives are touched by Bobby's loss and your loss.
Yep.
That's a huge pool. And now let's talk about 42 of those pools.
Mhm.
How many tens or hundreds of thousands of people are touched by this?
Mhm.
So I want to applaud you for recognizing how important that story is and how it relates to the data and the policies that have to be in place in order for change to happen.
Yeah,
So I
and
want
that's
to
what.
also call, remember, I talked a little bit about how to make your stories more compelling. And Nani, I did not talk about something that you did brilliantly. And so I want to like put a pin in it and give you a gold star and say, please continue to use it. And what Jim referred to as the pebble in the water. So you used a metaphor
I
to
did.
make something that might be an abstract concept really incredibly relatable to the audience, right? You just said they put their pens down. And if
I
your
did.
goal moving forward might be, I want to be a face for Vision Zero in my region, to have people put their pens down. Because Vision Zero, to be honest with you, and we know Leah Sham with the Vision Zero Network very well, because it works through cities and cities get blocked out, they can't be like advocates. So Brenda and you, Nani, can be sly, you can be guerrilla, you can you can be fluid, you can fill into the cracks where they can't bring that personal storytelling forward, right?
Right.
And you can find the way to be that story. And you could be like, let's say you might not want to do this, but because the San Jose Mercury News is a very influential paper, okay?
Mhm.
Could become the person that they call when they want to put the personal face on Vision Zero. You could become somebody that they're like, we know we are going to get this brilliant quote from her. She's going to make it real, right? So you've read the stories where you're one of 5 people, right? And Jim and I have both played the role, Jim more than me, because when I worked at the California Bicycle Coalition, I was not the policy person like Jim is. And so I always put the executive director first forward. But as Pedal Love, I'm called on to talk about women and bicycling in the media or active transportation in the media. So try that hat on a little bit, maybe in bite-sized chews, that you could play that role
And I
frequently.
will,
Go ahead.
please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Um, I'm just, I got a bench for Bob in the park. We had to go through the city council and the parks, and I shared my story there. So there are good people out there. They want to help. They are compassionate. So, Jim, just keep going. They're out there. They're listening to you. John, they're out there. Just hang in there. We're trying. We know you are in this big giant bureaucracy. I mean, it's. But again, I understand what you're saying, Melissa. But I also have some tangent. I've come to the realization that there's a lot of different groups. We all want the same thing, safe streets. We want this. We want to be able to do things. But again, it becomes to who do people, it's just so many of us, so many groups out there. And
Well,
everybody has.
We're gonna start going into like a little bit of a group discussion now, so we can wrap up on time, so that we
Go ahead.
can. But what you're talking about is getting really strategic, right? You're seeing already, and you were wise before. You're like, I'm new to this, but I'm kind of seeing how everything fits together. So it's really important to have people like you that see that, Nani. Like you have personal experience, and you can step back and you can see the big picture. It's really important. So what we want to do is very quickly for about 10 minutes to the end, we might go over a little bit if that's okay with everybody. We
So
want
Melissa, can I just finish one more
Yeah.
thing?
yeah,
Brenda and John, I can be an example for you. I can share a human, if you need a human tragedy story, that's part of my gift is I'll share. Okay?
good for you. Good for you, sweetheart.
Very,
It's
very,
really
very
amazing.
Very generous.
That's what we're
So-
here for.
So we've kind of you actually, in a sense, Nani, you gave us kind of you started us off because my question was going to be, what did you get from this exercise? And you've kind of already given us a brilliant overview of what you got from this. And so I'm going to go around kind of more quickly and ask. I've got two questions for you, and I'm going to ask one question, so we go a little bit more around. So we've heard from Nani about what you got from this exercise. Brenda, what did you get from this exercise?
Just really delving deeper into how to plan the story, how to make a plan for the story. So not just like getting the story and putting it on Instagram, which is what I was doing before, but like really kind of delving a little bit deeper into why am I taking people's energy to give me their story and how am I going to use it?
Great. John, how about you? What did you take away from this exercise?
Yeah, it's just a reminder of how much I don't know about how to reach people or remember to think about what other groups might be thinking and what their interests were, and that there are techniques that can be practiced, learned, practice to get down. And so, Jim, and when we started to go off on interesting tangents, you kind of pulled us back to the model, and I thought that was neat how there's two of you guys to, I guess, stretch us all in different directions.
Thank you for that.
So no, I really enjoyed going through this micro educational seminar, and really to hear and get to know Nani and Brenda a little bit more. Brenda, with the advocacy work that you're doing. One of the other differences I noticed is that right, so advocates can never give up or compromise, but a planner like me, my job is to come up with 3 to 5 options and
Yeah.
let the board decide. Your job is to say no. It goes on this street. This
Yeah.
is the street we want it on, not north or south of 7th or 8th or 9th. We want it on 7th Street in LA, or whatever.
So another question. So everybody was here, right? Everybody was here. Here, which one can you see about the exercise? Is anybody feeling like they got like a little bit up here? Has anybody moved the dial a little bit?
Yeah.
Moved up? Okay, that's remember, this is a baby step process. Okay, and so the next thing we want to ask you is, so Nani, we know that the court case is next, but so we're going to set that aside. You kind of implied what could be a next step for you with Vision Zero locally. What do you think you could do?
I'm on their mailing list, and I think there's some they talk about now we're I guess Vision Zero is kind of upset with the city because they're allowing some development and it didn't go through a step they were supposed to do because they agreed to. So I'm just watching that. My major concern on Vision Zero is I want the $7 million for 55 police officers. So I am not going to let that go. I'm just not going to let that go.
And Nani, let me suggest that you think about how stories can help make the case for spending that $7 million. You want to be watchdogging this, obviously, but if you start to see that money's not going where it's going, think about how many other Nanis are out there who are able to show up at a meeting, call their city council member, call the county executive, whoever it is that's holding it up, and remember that those stories are highly, highly persuasive. They're highly powerful. So storytelling is a tool that you can be using as you think about how to hold the city accountable for spending this money.
Great. Okay, so Brenda, what about you? What about next steps?
I think I'm gonna just continue to use this and apply it to all of the different campaigns that LACBC has going on right now. The one that I mentioned earlier, it's like already upon us, so I felt like a little too stressed out to try to work it into here. But I think really, yeah, just kind of sitting down and then mapping that out, maybe whiteboarding it as I
You've got a resource.
So definitely trying to share that resource within our org, and then just trying to kind of build the stories into it.
Fantastic. And keep in touch. We'll talk about this more. John, how about you? What's your next step?
Yeah, so I mean, I have presentations in the queue, and we're in a couple of workshops in September with a bike advocacy group. We have a contract, maybe it's real small, for some writing work, and graphic layout. So like we have an on-call contractor who does this great, graphical work, but I just don't know if we're going to get there with the storytelling or not. And maybe it's not too late to, talk to Pedal Love about what that might look like in a small kind of just grab you guys for just a couple sessions or something to help us out.
And we can bring Charlie in too, because he knows quite a bit more about being the former board member of CalBike. He also knows a lot about what's going on there. Okay, so let's talk about some final takeaways that Jim and I had from this that we want to share with you. And we think this was so wonderful to have these different levels, right? It was so great. I want to invite all of you to start calling yourselves a storyteller and putting storytelling as a strategy in just how you work in the world. Now, in some cases, you don't have to share this. John might not need to share this, but I think for Brenda and Nani, that this is a powerful language switch that you can use to tell people about who you're doing. And it's see how this hat fits for you, but it's something that becoming a really compelling storyteller or a storytelling strategist is not something you just arrive at. It's a constant process. And take small bite-sized chews, right? So it's learning how to be quoted in the media better, exactly the way you want. It's learning, Brenda, getting your Twitter and Instagram and Facebooks so people aren't just liking them, right? They're sharing them, and you're getting, and again, being in a very vast territory. What that means, John, it means people commenting of like, I was so engaged, I just didn't even know where that hour and a half went. We had such a good time with that workshop that we understand so clearly what you're doing. That's what a storytelling strategy is going to bring this to you. And I'm going to just, not everybody's going to go be a TED Global speaker. In fact, most of us are not going to be, or even a TEDx speaker. But I want you to understand that the TED Global speakers work with the TED team from 6 to 9 months on their story, just that one 8-minute to 20-minute story. So constantly working and upgrading your story or series of stories it's just an ongoing process. It's important, we touched on this, that it's important to be flexible in your storytelling so that, and Jim really hit on this, so that you get to a council meeting, you get to something, you realize, we were going to focus on this, and they're like their fingers in their ears about that. We need to switch gears now, and we need to tell Sally's story today. We need to tell so-and-so's story today, or we need to kind of switch the emphasis on this story. So that's really important to do that. And And I want to tell you that the last session we had, that was 2 Wednesdays, we had a gentleman who has worked for many, many years as an advocate, who was part of it. And he wrote back to us that a few days later, he had to go to one of these council meeting hearings, and he realized that they weren't prepared to switch gears like that, that they would have been more effective if they had, and that he was putting that now on his list of things to do. And now I'm going to turn it over to Jim to talk about his takeaways.
Thanks. And I'm really going to amplify a little bit of what Melissa just closed on, which is this idea of being strategic. I mean, we're all here today because we're on a mission to create a better world for everybody, one where everybody is safer, it's healthier, it's a friendlier place. I mean, that's what we all have in common. Accomplishing this change requires us to know what needs to be changed, but more importantly, how that change actually gets made. There's a process for getting these changes. There's a process for closing a bikeway gap. There's a process for getting the city council to approve the right funding for Vision Zero. There's a process for getting a regional active transportation plan adopted. And so creating that change is also a process, and it's the process of overcoming the status quo. John, you pointed out how a process hit a brick wall, a decision didn't get reached, and what we're talking about is overcoming entrenched processes, entrenched attitudes. Nani, you talked about people seeing crash victims as numbers. They're not numbers. They're people. They're families. They're networks. So we're pushing up against entrenched processes and attitudes, and this requires us to be on top of our game. And this is why we've talked about understanding how to recognize impactful stories and how to use those stories to have their biggest impact. That's how we can use storytelling to be at the top of our game. Making change is a strategic undertaking, and the role that you play in all of that needs to be undertaken strategically. And I'm not saying this because I have any doubts about any of you, but I really want to put an exclamation point on that, because being smart and strategic is really, really important in this business. Activist movements thrive on the passion of the people who drive them, including the passion of each of us around the table. And John, I consider you an activist, an embedded activist on behalf of a better world. So I won't tell a soul. That's the beautiful, exciting part about doing this work, right? Like we get to feel that passion and feel inspired by that passion. And passion is only going to get us so far, right? Because running only on passion is certainly a recipe for heartbreak and burnout. Nani, you've told your story many different times, and you've probably told it to people who aren't receptive. And so you've had a taste of what happens when the drive to tell the truth isn't met with the responses that you need. So that's the argument for being organized about how you do this, both as a person knowing what your limitations are, what you need, where you have your limits. You're competing for the attention of well-organized institutions and bureaucracies and businesses, right? Like SlowCog has a way of doing things, right? And that's what you're up against, right? You're up against that. Nani, you're up against the way that the city of San Jose operates, right? That's what you're up against. Same with you, Brenda. You're up against the way that things have always been done. But we're talking about change, which means we're talking about changing how things get done. So just remember that your passion may be the secret ingredient that they don't have, right? John, this is why you're looking for stories. Brenda, this is why you're thinking about creating a larger cohort of people to to participate in this movement. Nani, this is why you're talking about putting a human face on those numbers. And so I'm making a big pitch for being as strategic as you can possibly be about that. We need all of you out in the world. We don't need you burned out. We need you to feel the fruits of your labor, right? We need you to feel that success so that you're inspired to keep going forward. So this is a big pitch for being, for committing the energy to being as strategic as you can about going through all of this. So I think I'd like to close out by asking each of you, what is one thing that you've learned from someone in either last week's session or this week's session that has helped you or inspired you? One idea, one piece of feedback. We'll just let you go around the circle. Brenda.
I felt like the questions the homework kind of allowed me to ground certain disparate thoughts into one place. So I would just say, like, you know, maybe trying to allow those questions to guide the content of whatever you're trying to say.
Thank you. John or Nani, what's one thing you heard that inspired you? One of the things that your colleagues shared that inspired you?
Yeah, I think it has to do with just quieting down and finding a visceral experience to share. Smell, sight, taste, hearing, and that is a very legitimate place to start a discussion.
Remember that our human brains are wired to respond to that stuff. Automatically, a story told causes our brains to secrete the hormones that make us pay attention, make us feel empathy, make us feel motivated. So that's
the one thing I wanted to make sure that we mentioned one more time here was exactly that. If you get pushback and you have colleagues and you have bosses and things that say, storytelling, that's all I'm hearing these days, I'm tired of storytelling. Remember that both urban planners, advocates can really wonk out, right? And the ancient art of storytelling has the science behind it. So there's a lot of stuff that you can point people to and go, no, we're moving in the right direction finally.
Nani, do you have one idea or one piece of feedback or one idea that you're carrying away that you feel inspired by?
I'm inspired that there are people out there that care. In their various approaches towards a whole population that don't even know we exist. That's what I've come along, and I've just said, you know, and it's just, Brenda, you live in LA. I mean, I just live in little San Jose. My God, you know, you got a Herculean thing going on. And Jim, John, so San Luis Obispo, you know, you live in nice little country town. I'm jealous, but my thing is that we're all, you know, I just think everybody is working really, really hard to make people safe and do things, you know, and that's what my takeaway is, that I'm glad I meet different people trying to do the same thing.
Good.
Thank you for sharing that. I just want to thank you all for your honesty and your willingness to kind of crunch through some questions and make connections. You pushed yourself in doing something that either felt difficult or confusing or emotionally very charged. I really appreciate your courage and your willingness to participate over these last two sessions.
Thank you, guys. I really, this was a delight for us. It was a new way of working for us that we were testing out to do workshops online, and we're we're delighted with the experience, and we hope that you are too. We will follow up so that you can give us some feedback. We'll follow up with some further resources that we think will be helpful for you. Brenda and John, we will follow up to see if you guys want to connect to talk about some ways that we might be able to collaborate together, or Jim and I can be of assistance to you further. And you will be put on our email newsletter list because you've all said that that would be of benefit to you. So we will keep bringing you more of these storytelling stools and storytelling strategies. And just really, as you go through this weekend, give yourselves, we so appreciate it. Give yourselves all a gold star for being willing and courageous, like Jim said, to step out into something new, right? And stretch yourself like we asked. You all hit it. We couldn't have asked for better participation. So thank you. We're going to end this now and end the recording. I do have the recording. I will share it with you all three if you want it for this session. I think you might find it beneficial to play back. And with that, we're going to say goodbye.
Bye, guys. Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone.